Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 8th of November of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk one more time about Ukraine, about Kiev, and the most important updates are that the Ukrainians are planning to start mobilization of women. So the Ukrainians are planning to mobilize lots of females, probably currently, when talking about the current numbers, according to official sources, the Ukrainians have already 43 women currently serve in the nation's armed forces, and the Ukrainians are planning to increase the number from 43 till 90,000 soldiers. And there are a few things that I would like to discuss with you. First of all, we need to understand that mobilization of females is it's like required step for the Ukrainians. They don't have any other things to do, because during the previous phase of the special military operation, the Ukrainians lost around 500,000 of Ukrainian soldiers. Mainly they were losing like males. And just during this Ukrainian greatest summer counteroffensive operation, the Ukrainians lost up to 90,000 soldiers. So they need to keep balance in Ukraine. They need to keep balance. They can't continue like spending the male population and to collect female population. It's not good. Furthermore, the Ukrainians are not planning, at least for now, to send females to storm trenches, let's say to fight in close combat and something like this, to storm cities. First of all, the Ukrainians are planning to use women as like tank drivers, as machine gun, like on machine gun positions, as snipers, as truck drivers, and so on. So just for these like purposes. But from the other side, we need to understand another thing, that one more time, during the first phase of the special military operation since the beginning, right, the Ukrainians, according to some estimations, lost 500,000 of men. According to my raw estimations, the Ukrainians lost around 300,000 soldiers. Anyway, all those men who died serving, fighting for the Ukraine, had wives, had sisters, maybe they had mothers, they had daughters, and so on. And currently there are a lot of females, a lot of women in Ukraine who currently don't have any other source to live. First of all, that maybe some of them don't have even reasons to live, because maybe they lost their own child, their own son, or something like this, and all these women are living just with one purpose, with one hope, to fight with the Russians. So basically, due to significant losses among men, the Ukrainians want to legalize and to give possibility to these angry women to join the Ukraine army and to fight with the Russians. There is no like attempt to make these scary things on the streets, how the Ukrainians mobilize the Ukrainian men by taking them and dropping them in the cars. They're at least at the first phases of during the women mobilizations, we're not going to see this, but there are going to be a lot of volunteers, probably a lot of people, lots of women who want to serve, and the Ukrainians just will give them. Furthermore, don't forget that the most important update, that the Ukrainians have also been lifted, while the age limits for female recruits increased from 40 to 60. So this is exactly probably the mothers and maybe aunt of those guys, of those men who died somewhere in Robotyne. So they have lifted these age limits to give these women possibilities to serve. So anyway, this is not very good, because I see that from one side, the Zelensky probably want to find the balance, but from the other side, we see that currently he is ready to send women to fight with Wagner's and Ahmad special forces somewhere in Avdiivka just to save his power. Now let's move to the south, and we got a very interesting update from Odessa. Right before I start making this video, we got an update that the Russians attack a ship, a ship in Odessa port with Ha-31 missile, and that ship was damaged. Some people were wounded, and probably one personnel of that ship was killed. This is a very important update, because if you remember, after the Russians left the grain deal, we can say that the Russians established like a trade blockade of Ukrainian port infrastructure, but the Ukrainians somehow managed to find a solution how to continue all these trade things and so on. And of course, that was a very big problem for the Russians, not because of like the Ukrainians were able to bring weapon or to earn billions of dollars. Of course not. The main problem for the Russians was the reputation issues, because the Russians basically lost some reputation when the Ukrainians, as soon as the Ukrainians get possibilities to continue trading. So by this attack, probably the Russians increase the insurance risks, and and I believe that we will not find any insurance company who will risk to pay for insurance and to secure the ships and so on. Now let's move to Kherson direction. We got some updates. The Russians reported that as a result of clashes on Kherson area, the Ukrainians lost 30 soldiers, 4 armored vehicles and 3 artillery systems. And probably the losses are the lowest in comparison with the previous weeks of clashes. I remind you that the Ukrainians have some foothold on the Russian bank of Dnieper River, and there are very fierce clashes. The Russians haven't managed to force the Ukrainians to step back, but from the other side we see that Ukrainians, after they managed to collect and concentrate up to 1 battalion on the Russian side, start moving armored vehicles and light vehicles on the Russian side of the river. So very interesting updates. When talking about Krynki, in comparison with the previous update, we haven't received new updates. The only video we got is the Russian FAB bombing of the shore of the bank of Dnieper River, where, according to geolocation and coordinates, as we can see, the Ukrainians probably had some landing camp or landing area for their boats that were moving from Tyaginka, Lvova, from every single city on the Ukrainian side. So maybe the Russians managed to discover the landing position, just destroyed. We don't have the numbers and we don't have the results of that attack. Furthermore, the Russians are saying that during the previous 24 hours, they managed to shoot down up to 5 aircrafts in all over the entire Ukraine. The Russians destroyed Su-27, 2 MiG-29 and 2 Su-25, and some of them were destroyed exactly in Kherson direction. On this video, we can see the Ukrainian FPV drone against the Russian forces in the village by the name of Oleshki. Now we're moving further to Zaporozhye direction. The Russians reported that as a result of clashes on this area, the Ukrainians lost around 80 soldiers, 15 armored vehicles, including 3 tanks and 2 artillery systems. As you can see, the level of loss of the Ukrainian forces was very heavy, and mainly that situation was connected with more attempts from the Ukrainian side to attack to the west from Robotyne. For those purposes, the Ukrainians sent another wave of armored vehicles, including Bradley and Leopards, but as we see, according to the Ministry of Defense, those armored vehicles were damaged. Some of them were damaged, some of them were destroyed, and we have the fresh geolocations. On this video we can see the Western personal carrier, probably M119, and as a result of FPV drone strike by the FPV squad of Babry, that armored vehicle, probably with personnel inside, was damaged or even destroyed. We don't have but we don't have the explosion or something like this, but anyway, another armored vehicle minus another armored vehicle. A little bit to the east, closer to Robotyne, we got another video how the Ukrainians tried to hide their armored vehicles somewhere among the fields, but as a result of FPV drone strike, another machine was damaged or probably even destroyed. So that was another day of very fierce clashes from the Ukrainian side and in direction of Kopany. Maybe the Ukrainians managed to achieve something. Anyway, I have updated the map because at least this interception of 3 lines used to be under Russian control, and now we see that this territory, according to the Russian FPV drone strike, currently is located under complete Ukrainian control. So they're moving further, and for now they managed to achieve some results. Now we have also very interesting updates from the northern part of Novoprokopovka. If you remember, during the August and probably September, the Ukrainians managed to enter even the northern part of this village, and this area used to be in the gray zone, but now we got update from the Ukrainian forces of FPV drone strike against the Russian infantry in the northern part, which confirms the Russian control over this territory. When talking about Verbova, there are no updates, just regular bombardments and clashes, and the Ukrainians are having significant losses, and there are no changes on the ground. Now we are moving to the south Donetsk direction. The Russians reported that as a result of clashes in this area, the Ukrainians lost 145 soldiers, 9 armored vehicles and 3 artillery systems. On this video we can see how the Ukrainians were using multi-launch rocket system Grad against the Russian offensive forces that were attacking the Ukrainians in the vicinity of Ugledar. The Russians during that attack was trying to discover the Ukrainian artillery positions, and as we see, they managed to discover one Grad, and as a result of Lancet strike, that system was destroyed, and probably the Ukrainians reduce their possibilities in defense, at least in Ugledar direction. Furthermore, we discussed that currently there are very heavy clashes in this area. The Russians are trying to attack the Ukrainian positions, but for now, as I understand, maybe they managed to achieve some results, some progress, but the progress is minimal according to at least geolocations we have. And the main purpose, as we discussed currently for the Russians, is to let's say to maintain the gap, to maintain the gray zone, and to shorten their, let's say, the combat line, and to take control over this tree line, which will allow the Russians in advance to establish control over, at least fire control over the main supply roads that goes from Konstantinovka to Vodyane and Ugledar. So operation is very old. This is not something new. As we discussed, this is the first attempt of the Russian forces to storm Ugledar. Maybe this time they will create something new. They will not repeat their old mistakes. When talking about Avdiivka area, we got also a lot of updates. One of the most interesting probably video that we will not watch, obviously, took place somewhere between Severna and Avdiivka. We will not watch this video, maybe just the beginning. On this video we can see how the Ukrainians brought like infantry and the armored personnel carrier, something like a platoon. It was maybe some kind of normal rotation. The Ukrainians landed their infantry. The Ukrainian infantry, those forces, like got their positions in these trenches, and as soon as machine arrived, the Russians started bombing this machine with FPV drones. So we will not watch the next scene, the next episodes, but the Ukrainians brought around 11 troopers, and they managed to take control over the trenches. They managed to dig in deeper to get into some shelters, but all of them were killed as a result of FPV drone strikes. The Russians, to destroy that platoon of 11 Ukrainian soldiers, haven't used even a single soldier, just FPV drones. This is the future. Obviously, this is the future, and I think that in a year, we are, let's say in November of 2024, if the special military operation are going to continue, we will see completely different clashes and battles on the ground. Also, updates are coming from the northern direction. We got some geolocations of bombardments of the area in the vicinity of the railways, which confirms the Russian progress, the Russian positions in this area. But as we discussed in the previous video, the Russians still haven't started any offensive operation in Berdych and Stepovo, probably some reconnaissance operations. As we discussed before, before further attacks in direction Stepovo and Berdychi, the Russians need to create a 5 kilometers line, a front line from Terikon to the north. And now the Russians are completely focused in developing their positions on the north, and as soon as they establish control over this gray square, they will be able to continue offensive operation further in Berdychi and Stepovo. For now, they're here, they're focused here heavily, they're attacking this area with tanks, with artillery forces. Maybe they have already started some ground operation with troopers and armored vehicles, but without this foothold, it's too early to talk about clashes for Berdychi and Stepovo. Furthermore, as we discussed, just like when South Donetsk direction, we see the video of Lancet strike against the multi-launch rocket system Grad, and also today the Russian sources published two videos how the Russians managed to destroy two Ukrainian armored vehicles of 47th Mechanized Brigade, probably Braidlace, also somewhere in the Avdiivka direction. All these icons I have added on map softly. The geolocations are not correct. The only thing we know that these Lancet strike, these two Lancet strikes took place somewhere in the vicinity of Avdiivka. Probably understand somewhere in the vicinity of Очеретовата, the area, the main logistic area where we can find the strongest or the heaviest positions of 47th Mechanized Brigade. So the Russians have redeployed their Lancet forces here due to significant number of armored vehicles that Ukrainians also have redeployed. So the next few weeks are going to be very hot in this area, because during the next few weeks the Russians will establish full control over the Krasnogorovka between railways area, and we're going to see the first clashes and probably how the Russians establish control over Berdychi in Stepovo. Now we're moving to Artyomovsk direction. We got significant number of updates from this territory. The Russians reported that as a result of clashes on Donetsk direction, the Ukrainians lost 235 soldiers, 7 armored vehicles. And the most important updates are coming from Berkhovka reservoir area from the fields between Bogdanovka, Yagidna, and Berkhovka, Dubovo, Vasilivka. The Russians 3 days in a row are advancing, and they're getting more and more territories on this direction. According to information we have, as a result of clashes in this area, there are very high chances, and some sources are saying that the Russians managed to establish or improve their positions somewhere in this square. So the Russians managed to enter the next tree line, the next, let's say, railway tree line that goes in direction of Chasov Yar. The Russians managed to maintain their positions between Reservoir and Khromovo, and they're pushing the Ukrainians. And the situation is very critical, and we discussed this operation, that currently there are two synchronous operations. The Russians are attacking in direction of Bogdanovka, and the Ukrainians were trying to attack in direction of Kurdyumovka, Zelenopolye. But the problem is that Ukrainians have lack of manpower. There are very heavy clashes in Avdiivka and Kupiansk, so the Ukrainians were operating with very limited resources in this area. And today, somewhere at noon time, we got some first updates that Ukrainians took a decision to redeploy some operational reserves from Avdiivka in direction of Berkhovka. So some forces, I'm not saying like about thousands, there are no thousands of soldiers in this direction. Maybe few hundreds, maybe 1-2 battalions were redeployed in direction of Berkhovka to try to stabilize the area and not to allow the Russians to capture all these tree lines and so on. So they have redeployed some forces, and the Russians understood that if the Ukrainians have redeployed forces from the south, that means that they from now on they no longer have possibilities to continue their offensive operation in direction of Zelenopolye, Kurdyumovka. And the Russians took a decision to launch another attack, another wave of offensive operation, and the Russians launched a very powerful attack in direction of Klishchiivka. And let's discuss this battle in details, because this is very important. First, the Russians were bombing and clearing this area using FPV drones. There was like significant number of armored vehicles, hidden positions. All of them were destroyed as a result of FPV drone strike by the Russian forces. But we need to understand that the Russians attacked Klishchiivka not because of that fact that Ukrainians have redeployed their forces to the north in direction of Berkhovka. The main reason is that the Russians want to pin down the Ukrainians and not to allow to redeploy the reinforcement. And that attack in Klishchiivka is just ruins. There are no place where the Russians have like established like long-term fortifications or shelters, but they can cut or at least reduce the main redeployment road. So let's return back to the map. If the Russians can establish control over this part, let's assume this like with a very fast and expected attack, the Ukrainians will lose possibilities to take forces from Andreevka, area, and to redeploy them to the north, because basically this territory will be cut and this redeployment road will be cut. One more time about Klishchiivka. Today at 4 p.m. we got the first update that the Russians launched an offensive operation in direction of Klishchiivka, and that the Russians entered Klishchiivka and that there were very heavy clashes. That was at 4 p.m. And later at 8 p.m. we got that information that the Russians managed to force the Ukrainians to step back from Klishchiivka and that the Russians continue advancing. So I believe that tomorrow or maybe this night we're going to receive more updates, and the most important, we're going to receive whether all these updates with Klishchiivka and Berkhovka are true, or that was something like a speculation with one purpose, to make panic among the Ukrainians. Very difficult to understand because we haven't received even a single geolocated video confirmation about any progress in this area. During the day, the Ukrainians tried to use their reserves and reinforcement from the area of Grigorievka, and they had some operational reserves on the north as well, but the Russians also calculated that situation, they counted that area, they managed to project this situation, and they start bombing and shelling Kurdyumovka heavily with all types of weapons they have. And that attack with probably TOS flamethrower systems and multi-launch rocket systems forced the Ukrainians to, let's say, to pin down, and they lost momentum and they couldn't redeploy forces to stabilize the area in the vicinity of water reservoir. That was the reason also why the Ukrainians took a decision to redeploy some forces from the south. So the situation is critical for the Ukrainians, and basically currently at this moment they're losing everything they managed to achieve during the summer military campaign in the vicinity of Artyomovsk. When talking about Kupiansk and Liman front lines, there are no changes in this area. The only thing we know for sure that the Russians have redeployed and start concentrating Wagner forces exactly in the Kremenная forest. I don't know the reasons of that. I'm not sure that the Russians are planning to use Wagners, the troopers who used to fight in cities, in cities among the buildings, now will fight in the forest. This is not their area. This is not the thing they're common with. This is something strange for them, for Wagners to fight in forest. But maybe the Minister of Defense had another opinion about that fact. So anyway, also I expect some activity in this area. Furthermore, the Russians published the video how they started demining process of the combat line in Kremenная, and maybe this situation also is connected with the appearance of Wagner on this line. I hope, when talking about Wagner and Akhmat special unit, I hope just one thing, that we're not going to see the battles among the 60 years old women with Wagner, because if we see something like this, obviously this is going to be a complete disaster for Zelensky and Ukraine, because it's unacceptable by anybody. When talking about Kupiansk direction, the Russians reported that as a result of clashes in this area, the Ukrainians lost 30 soldiers. It was a very pretty calm day. The Russians tried to regroup and to, let's say, to replace the losses, to evacuate wounded that they got during the previous days of clashes. On this video we see how the Russians were trying to evacuate wounded soldiers, and the Ukrainians FPV drone destroyed the Russian evacuation machine. So nothing special happened on this front line during the previous 24 hours. So let's wait for upcoming night, because as I understand, this upcoming night is going to be very interesting regarding updates of Avdiivka and the Artyomovsk Bakhmut. So we'll see what is going to be next. I hope that the Russians are not going to use fake Zaluzhny one more time. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you, condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.